This video contains major spoilers for The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom. I was really excited when Echoes of Wisdom was announced. I mean, it was going to be Zelda's first outing as the protagonist. Oh god. Oh, I just had an awful nightmare. Like I said, this is Zelda's first real outing as a protagonist, and it was a decent showing. More than anything, it's just a cute game. And I'm okay with just a cute game. I'm Ouroboros. Let's talk. We start off our adventure with Link near the end of his adventure on the way to face Ganon of all enemies. He's fully decked out, and this pseudo-tutorial is actually a really creative way to get the player used to the movement mechanics of the game in a safe space. With big ol' air quotes on that. Technically there's enemies and stuff, but Link is maxed out on everything, so you really shouldn't be dying here. And more importantly, you can jump, and it's not like the 6 inches like it is in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. I know Link has been able to jump in previous 2D entries, but it's nice to feel meaningful right off the bat. You also get used to general combat, Z-targeting or whatever it's called now, and all that fancy stuff. I really wasn't prepared for the escape sequence right off the bat and just immediately died on my first go around. It's a little tough to feel that frantic energy when you've just got Zelda trying her hardest to run with those cute little legs. I'd honestly love to see a prequel section with Link's journey to get to Zelda, but this story isn't really about him, so I'm not complaining. If you've watched the first trailer for this game, you immediately recognize that it basically encompasses the first 10 minutes or so of this game. It's an awesome opening in all honesty. You get to see Link face Ganon and succumb to the rift, then Zelda's subsequent escape from the dungeon and return to the castle. That's really all the narrative setup this game needs. You simultaneously get a lot of questions and objectives from your brief initial visit to Hyrule Castle. You know that you need to go to the various rifts around the map and work with Tri to mend them. You know that people turn into stone when they enter the rift. But now you have to question whether or not anyone you speak to is an imposter or not. This inherently throws a wrench into all of your visits. You can't trust everyone you meet. There's always that chance that someone has ulterior motives which are contradictory to your own. I mean, the king, your very own father, was replaced with a fake and threw you in prison. If it weren't for Impa saving you and then absolutely messing up some of the soldiers, you would have still been trapped. And you do get a cute little moment here where you receive your new set of clothes. Normally the game would just cut to black so that the devs wouldn't have to show a character changing clothes, but here Nintendo just decided to have Zelda walk behind a statue to change. There are small little details like this throughout the game that make it so endearing. You've also got the various wanted posters throughout the kingdom which just don't look like Zelda. You'd think they'd find someone who knew what the princess looked like, but it's a nice touch and it's reminiscent of A Link to the Past. In fact, the game, specifically the world, feels very similar to A Link to the Past. What I really enjoyed throughout my journey was hearing all the townspeople talk about Link and seeing the cobweb and extra hat lying around in his house. It's funny because normally the series is The Legend of Zelda, and you hear so much about her, but when Zelda becomes the protagonist, they switch places. They really respect and look up to him. They appreciate all the good deeds he's done and speak about him like some kind of legend or folktale. It's like hearing all the stories of Red when you travel to Kanto in Gen 2. You've only briefly seen Link's strength, and we all know what he does in a normal game. You get to see the other side of the coin in Echoes of Wisdom. You do, of course, revisit Hyrule Castle once you've gone through the first set of dungeons. It was cool getting to see the jail where they started things, but I really wish they would have actually excluded the diary there. I know it can sound weird to wish away optional content, but it would have been so much more impactful to experience that moment solely through environmental storytelling. We see Impa in the jail. It's clear that she can take down multiple guards. The only logical reason she would be in there is if she willingly let herself get captured to buy Zelda time to escape. I don't think we really needed the game to spell that out for us, but that's a really minor and specific critique. But that leads us to one of the most important story moments in this game, which I didn't get much footage of because I wasn't prepared to hit record. I'm seriously angry that I couldn't get this because it's such a good cutscene, but It is what it is. Link gets trapped in the same crystal that Zelda was once trapped in at the beginning of the game, and a crystal that looks shockingly similar to the one in Ocarina of Time. I know these little throwbacks are pretty common in the series and other franchises as well, but as a longtime fan of the game, it's always really nice to notice them. I enjoy seeing Zelda get a new outfit, one that does seem more accustomed to travel and combat, if you want to call it that. She even gets a bit of a different title, Priestess, which seems fitting for this game, and the Hyrule Field theme changes a bit to include Zelda's lullaby once she's cleared her name. This may be a bit of a side tangent, but I'm glad Echoes of Wisdom used a different gameplay system from typical Zelda. Zelda and Link always feel like two halves of a whole, an idea that is strongly reinforced throughout this entire game. Link fought his way through who knows what to save Zelda at the beginning, and now Zelda is fighting to save Link. You can even see it in past titles. Link fought to protect Zelda in Breath of the Wild, now she's fighting to protect him. And while Link uses his courage to achieve his objective, Zelda uses her wisdom. They shouldn't tackle challenges in the same way. Doing so would cheapen Zelda's character. This is an issue I have with modern, well, media. Movies, TV shows, games, whatever. People think, hey, what if we take this beloved character and make them a woman? I think that's insulting towards women because it says that the only way a woman can be successful is if she replaces or just imitates a man. Nintendo expanded on Zelda's character simply by forcing her to tackle problems in a different way. Of course, I'm not saying that a woman can't do the same things as a man, but replacing historically male characters with female counterparts, or putting a female protagonist in a role that isn't consistent with their character, is lazy. Hopefully, I explained that well and it made sense. God, I really hope that didn't come off as sexist. Anyway, with that side tangent out of the way, one of my favorite parts of the game is when you get to interact with the Deku Scrubs. These little dudes absolutely stole this show for me. They have the dumbest, most charming humor in the whole game. Like, okay, take for example when you get imprisoned and the guard gives you a stick. The text box says, "It's sticky." Which is such an amazing double meaning because of the cotton candy and because it's a stick. So it's sticky. It's stick-y. Stick. Do you get it? And then probably my favorite joke of the whole game, when you have the two scrubs arguing about saving their friends or keeping the cotton candy, one of them asks the other if they care more about your friends or about cotton candy. And then there's this long silence. I know these scenes don't have basically any impact on the story or the gameplay, but it's small moments like this that really add up over the course of the game to just make it cute. The Gorons looking like goofy goobers, Darston's good, albeit predictable character growth, Conde's brother returning in the credits, even though his section is way too short when you get to him. It's just cute. The only not cute thing about the story is Null, who feels like a weird addition to this game. I mean, it's just kind of a casual adventure/puzzle game, and then Nintendo just decided to drop a big lore bomb on us. Apparently, the goddesses didn't create the world to, bestow life, but rather as a prison to contain Null. It decided to start consuming everything, and that's where the Tries come in, and the Triforce, apparently. I'm not complaining, don't get me wrong, but it's just a crazy addition and something I definitely was not expecting. Unfortunately, as happy as I was to see a new villain, I didn't really enjoy Null's fight at the end of the game. And that's true for pretty much all the phases except for the first one. It feels like there really isn't much for you to do in the fight. You have Link with you, who is inherently going to be the major damage dealer, so you just kind of let him do his thing. Null also drops a metric ton of hearts throughout the fight, Seriously, I swear I saw more hearts in this fight than the rest of the game combined. It also feels so contradictory to the rest of the game. There's not really much puzzle element to it. It's more of a whack it till it dies type of boss. But the biggest sin of this fight, and I mean this is an absolute atrocity, is that you can't ever switch to Link? Why? This seemed like such a gimme, such an obvious mechanic to implement here. I was so ready for the game to finally let me switch and play as Link, and it just never happened. You spend all of the previous bosses solving the puzzle element with Zelda and then doing damage with Link. Why does that suddenly change for the final boss? They already have Link controlled by an AI, just code in something similar for Zelda. You've also got the entire section leading up to the Null fight where you're working together. Why couldn't you swap between the two and solve puzzles that way? I'm seriously at a loss for words on this. I guess I just made a quick assumption, and you know what happens when you make assumptions. You make an ass out of you and umptions. But really, the gameplay felt so good at the beginning, and then it just kind of petered out as the game went on. I was disappointed to see that for a final boss because Tears of the Kingdom had one of the best final bosses in the entire series. It starts off so well too, you get echoes so quickly it feels like your arsenal is exploding exponentially in the opening hours. Then you get to the stilled world, and eventually gain access to your Link form. It's a nice way to meld the new and old, a bit like easing you into this new style. It was also a nice touch to change the music whenever you switch forms. You've still got the old 2D Zelda combat to fall back on if you struggle to wrap your head around certain challenges. I do really like the times you're encouraged to use Link, like during the boss fights, which, with the exception of the Null fight, are really good. They're incredibly engaging because you have to keep track of so many different things throughout the fights. You've got the typical puzzle elements that the series is known for, but you have to manage your echoes while also evading the boss's attacks. Then you have to pay attention to your meter and use it effectively when you're able to deal damage to the boss. You're able to use your echoes to fight the boss, but until you get stronger ones, the bulk of your damage will be with Link. That does bring about a bit of a dilemma though. The most exciting parts of combat are with Link, i.e. traditional Zelda gameplay, and in all honesty, combat is a real pain otherwise. There's really nothing that engaging about spawning a bunch of enemies and then just chucking pots. Of course, that's until you end up with a super broken echo like the level 3 Dark Nut that just obliterates every enemy you see. For a lot of my adventure, I would just avoid enemies, particularly in the overworld because they just aren't worth your time. If we had gotten meaningful rewards from the chests, that would alleviate this problem. See, most of the chests you find contain either smoothie ingredients or rupees. Health is managed similar to Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, where you have to make food, or in this case, smoothies, in order to instantly regain large portions of your health. There's an item that increases the chance of heart spawning, but I swear it did absolutely nothing for me. Rupees are also used to upgrade the amount of equipable accessories. Unfortunately, I found that outside of a very few specific accessories, they were mostly just quality of life additions. And once you find a few good smoothie recipes, you're probably going to be set. All of this heavily disincentivizes combat unless absolutely necessary, like in dungeons. That's one of the most frustrating parts of the gameplay loop. The most exciting part of the typical gameplay is when you get to use Link. But Echoes of Wisdom so heavily restricts when you can use that form that I found myself actively disengaging with the game's mechanics. The upgrades help, especially the meter increase, but I don't think it solves the problem. I also think if the game was more generous with heart pieces in the overworld, that would help. Is it just me, or are heart pieces really hard to find in this game? I feel like I thoroughly explored the overworld, but never really found many. A lot of side quests also offer the usual rupee and ingredient rewards. I'd like to think that I'm at least decent at picking up heart pieces, especially on return visits that I had previously missed, but I just never managed to do that in Echoes of Wisdom. That's not to say the gameplay is all bad though. I do think this is a fantastic puzzle game, especially early on. It does kind of follow the same Zelda formula of help the townspeople, clear the dungeon, killing the boss clears the area of, evil? And that opens up new stuff for you to do. You've also got fun minigames here and there, like the mango harvesting one. You've got various long-term side quests, like the stamp collecting. But Nintendo opted to do side quests like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. This is nothing new, but I'm glad that gaming in general has shifted in this direction of adding even just small stories to side quests. It definitely beats the whole go kill 10 of these trash enemies side quests that you used to get in older games. Another thing that I particularly enjoyed in Echoes of Wisdom is how it goes about puzzles. It's very similar to Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom in that it gives you a ton of tools, and you're free to decide which ones fit the problem at hand. I think we've moved past the days of having very specific solutions to very specific problems. It's a change that I know some people aren't a fan of, but I personally really like having the freedom to solve puzzles in my own way, particularly in the dungeons. For the most part, the dungeons are excellent in this game. As far as I can tell, you can kind of tackle the dungeons in any order, as long as you're within that specific chunk of the game. Like, you can do the pre-Hyrule Castle dungeons in any order, and then you can do the post-Hyrule Castle dungeons in any order. Don't quote me on that, though. One of my personal favorites is Lanayru Temple. It's a nice take on the usual fire/ice temple because you aren't only relying on trying to heat up the dungeon. That would be the obvious thing to do. Typically, you have to melt things in an ice dungeon, but here, there's a mix. Sometimes you need to melt water so that you can dive down and retrieve something or overcome an obstacle. But sometimes you need to freeze it so that you can walk across the newly formed ice. I don't think I've seen a Zelda dungeon that combines these two elements before. There may be mechanics like this in one of the Oracle games, but it's been a minute since I've played one of those. It reminds me a bit of the Great Bay Temple in Majora's Mask. There are times when you need the water to be flowing in one direction, and times where it needs to be flowing the opposite. Just like how there are times when you need to heat a room, and other times when you need to cool it. It's not a mindless reaction to seeing a switch. You have to put some thought into what problems you're given. I will say, I had no idea how to fight the mini-boss. There were a few times where I had to look up solutions online, which is something that I don't do until I'm super tilted, and this was one of them. The other was Pharaon Temple. At first, I thought it was really cool because you were going in and out of the dungeon, but then came the block moving puzzles. I don't know if there was a sign that I missed, but apparently you were supposed to figure out that you need to press the switches simultaneously. I never got that memo. I don't know how I made it that far into the dungeon without realizing it. Maybe I just got lucky, but I was stuck flailing for a while there. The water currents are apparently one-ways too. I had just assumed that there was a way to block the water flow. I mean, you can drop blocks to cover basically the whole current and it still stays there. That always seemed odd to me in a puzzle game that's this free. But that's probably just on me. Like I said earlier, I do really like the dungeon bosses. Phantom Ganon is really great. I mean, it's basically just a normal Ganon fight because you've got a game of wizard ping pong to determine the fate of the world, but I like how it's a bunch of phases that stack on top of each other. Phantom Ganon always adds 1 or 2 attacks to his arsenal, so by the 4th phase, you've scaffolded your way up to a boss fight with more attacks than most in the entire series. However, it slowly adds those over the course of the fight, so you never feel overwhelmed. I think it would work well for a late game boss, but it sits right in the middle of the game. Scorchill in Lanayru Temple is really fun as well and uses similar concepts. Instead of stacking attacks, it swaps between similar ones with different elemental properties, and then after spending phases exclusively using fire or ice attacks, it will now freely swap between them. I liked Vocavore in the Jabal Ruins because of the setup prior to the fight. You start off the dungeon with a quick escape sequence, which, in hindsight, there's more than I would have expected from a Zelda game. You get a brief glimpse of it, and it becomes a boss, and oh god, it can fly! There's even an entire optional dungeon with a boss at the end that you can do around Central Hyrule. It's really helpful to tackle early game, which I did, because it gives you an accessory that reduces damage taken. This is incredibly helpful because smoothies are kinda hard to come by at the beginning. There's so many other things, whether big or small, that make the typical gameplay really fun. Like realizing that Zelda can actually hide in the pots. Like realizing that you can fly with the gyros. Like realizing that you can cast echoes from a distance. Although, because of the non-linearity, you might run into some weird experiences depending on your own progression. For example, I remember getting the level 3 Dark Nut, and this basically became the sole combat mechanic from that point on. Or how you can bypass basically all the platforming challenges once you obtain the Cloud Echo. I personally didn't have to worry about the cloud breaking the game for me since I went to Lineru last, but I can see this causing an issue with many players. I also have no idea how I was supposed to beat Volvagia. I was really hoping it'd be a creative fight with the gyros, you know, one of the most fun echoes to use which were introduced in that area, but no, I just kinda hit him until he died. Which sucks, because I really enjoyed the Elden area as a whole. And shout out to the water dungeon finally not being confusing and sucky. Although I usually like water dungeons in most Zelda games. I like that there does seem to be a nice mix of linearity and non-linearity. The dungeons serve as a nice return to form for the most part, while the overworld retains that new Zelda feeling of freedom and exploration. Tri does give you some direction, but is really one of the least invasive partners in the series. And I do like that the Tri upgrades merge gameplay with storytelling. There is one thing I've saved until now that I do want to talk about. The frame rate in this game is an issue. I'm not one to get too bogged down with performance issues. I mean, I'm playing a game on the Switch, for God's sake. But rather, it's how the game handles the frame rate. You can check out other channels like Digital Foundry for a more technical breakdown, but the game is constantly shifting frame rates. Even after getting heavily into PC gaming, I don't mind playing a game at 30 FPS. But Echoes of Wisdom isn't okay with settling for 30. Except it runs at 30-ish when you're moving, but then when you stop, it jumps up to 60. And the game fluctuates between 30 and 60 a lot of the time. I don't understand why they decided to optimize it this way. Well, I don't even know if you would call it optimization at this point. I'd rather the game just stay at a steady 30. My eyes will eventually adjust to playing a game at that frame rate. But when things are constantly shifting, there's no point when your eyes and brain can settle in and say, okay, this is what the game is gonna look like. It's like being in a room and the lights aren't all staying on. Sometimes they're all on, sometimes they're all off, sometimes they flicker, sometimes only some lights turn off. It's just so disorienting. But enough about my woes with the performance of this game. The music and presentation are top-notch here. I don't really know how to describe this art style. It kind of gives me toy box or even diorama vibes. I like that the bottom part of the screen is almost blurry, like your eyes aren't focused on that part of the diorama. We do go back to the old music style, where we always have something playing in the background. One nice bit of musical storytelling is the difference between the river and the sea Zora. I don't know for sure if we've ever had both of the new and old version of the Zora in the same game, but I like that their music reflects the differences in each tribe. The River Zora are brash and unrefined, and the Chief's Horn reflects that. The Sea Zora are the opposite, and the harp reflects them as well. The two do eventually play for Lord Jabu Jabu, and we get to hear exactly what they sound like together. I also noticed that the harp is very similar to the Zora's Domain theme from Ocarina. It's also just a really cute scene with all of you and Tri sitting on your head. I know that Echoes of Wisdom isn't the most Zelda game out there. It differs quite a bit from previous titles, but I'm happy that we finally got to see the titular princess experience her own journey. Even though she's still a silent protagonist, I feel like she was very different from Link. He did lose his voice due to being swallowed in a rift. Oh yeah, that was just chilling down in Blueberry's basement, if you missed that kind of important detail. He does get it back by the end of the game though. I've said this before on my channel that games don't need to be long to be fun. As much as I love my big, grand RPGs, I love short adventures like Ori or Metroid or even Echoes of Wisdom. I do feel it overstayed its welcome a bit though. The progression kind of levels off and you feel like you've just kind of seen a lot that the game has to offer. Many of the new Echoes you get late game are just, oh hey, here's this enemy, but they're a little bit stronger. I think that kind of ruins the momentum of the game leading up to the midway point. The frame rate issues absolutely frustrate me to the point of wondering how games like Tears of the Kingdom or Doom run decent on Switch and this one just somehow doesn't. However, just like almost every game ever made, there are trade-offs to be had. There's good, there's bad, there's ugly. And I think reviewing games has taught me that we need to acknowledge all of them without diminishing the others. When Echoes of Wisdom does things right, it's a ton of fun. It's some of the most fun I've had with video game puzzles since messing around in Portal years and years ago. The music and art style are charming, and the overworld is teeming with things to do, albeit without a lot of meaningful rewards. But most of all, Echoes of Wisdom is just a cute game. It can genuinely put a smile on your face with heartwarming and goofy moments to make you feel like a kid again. Thanks for watching.